On a remote hillside near Mount Ararat in Turkey lies a huge and mysterious boat shape. Many scientists believe it's just an unusual rock formation, but some investigators claim that amazingly...
Imagine you're standing on a wind-whipped mountain in Turkey. It's 2026, and your team is running high-tech radar over a massive boat-shaped mound of dirt. Suddenly, the screen flashes. You aren't looking at solid rock anymore. Deep beneath the surface, there's a massive, hollow silhouette, a void that shouldn't be there. It's a room buried under 20 feet of ancient clay. In that moment, the mystery becomes real. This isn't just a hill, it's a heartbeat inside the mountain. The Genesis blueprint. So, here's where things get actually eerie. If you grew up hearing the story of the Ark, you probably pictured a giant, bathtub-shaped boat with a little house on top and a giraffe poking its neck out of a window. But the data coming off these 3D scans is painting a picture that is way more industrial and way less storybook. When the 2026 team started overlaying the radar imagery with the specific measurements found in ancient texts, specifically the 3-deck layout mentioned in Genesis, the skeptics in the room got real quiet, real fast. We're talking about a structure that measures roughly 300 cubits long. Now, if you're not an ancient measurement nerd, a cubit is basically the length from a man's elbow to his fingertips. When you do the math, that's about 515 feet. That is massive. To put it in perspective, that's longer than a football field and a half. It's nearly the size of a modern Navy carrier. But the size isn't the shocker. It's the internal geometry. The scans show these distinct horizontal layers, a lower, second, and third deck, divided by what look like structural bulkheads. In the world of geology, nature doesn't really do right angles and symmetrical floors inside a mountain. If you look at a natural rock formation, it's chaotic, it's messy. But this looks like a blueprint. The radar shows these long, parallel lines running the length of the formation, spaced out in a way that suggests intentional flooring. It's like looking at the skeletal remains of a skyscraper that's been crushed and petrified by the weight of the world. The lower deck seems to be the heaviest, packed with dense material that could have been ballast or storage for massive supplies. The second deck shows more intricate divisions, almost like individual stalls or rooms, and the third deck sits just below the surface of the mud, where the atrium or ventilation gap would have been. Scientists are looking at these one-to-one matches and realizing that the proportions aren't just close, they are identical. It's not just a big boat shape, it's a specific engineering design that matches a text written thousands of years ago. When you see the digital wireframe of the scans glowing on a laptop screen next to a 4,000-year-old description, you start to realize we might not be looking at a myth. We're looking at a sunken relic of a lost world. The blueprint is there, hidden under layers of hardened sediment, just waiting for someone to finally admit that the legend had the measurements right all along. It's making people sweat, because if the boat is real, then the event that put it there, a mountain-topping surge, is something we have to take seriously. We're staring at the literal bones of a mystery that was supposed to stay buried. Every pixel on that screen is a slap in the face to the idea that this is just a rock. This is architecture. This is a design. This is the blueprint of survival. But even more baffling than the 3 decks is the massive, empty space right in the heart of the ship that seems to defy the laws of ancient naval design. The atrium mystery. If the 3-deck layout is the body of the ship, then this next part is the lung. Right in the center of the 3D scans, there is a giant vertical hollow that cuts through all 3 levels. In the archaeology world, this is being called the atrium, and it's arguably the most controversial part of the whole site. Why would an ancient builder leave a massive hole in the middle of a vessel meant to survive the apocalypse? From a modern engineering perspective, it actually makes a terrifying amount of sense. If you have thousands of living things packed into a wooden hull for months, you have 2 major enemies: carbon dioxide and heat. Without a way to circulate air, the whole ship becomes a tomb within days. This central void suggests a high-level understanding of the stack effect. Basically, hot air rises and pulls fresh air in from the sides. It's the same way a chimney works. The atrium wasn't just a design choice, it was a life support system. But there's another theory that's even cooler, literally. Some researchers think this central shaft was designed for light. If the top of the vessel was sealed tight against the rain and waves, it would have been pitch black inside. A central, translucent opening at the very top would have allowed sunlight to filter down through all 3 decks, illuminating the core of the ship. Think of it like a skylight for the end of the world. The 2026 scans show that the walls of this atrium are reinforced with what appear to be thick, vertical pillars. It's not just an empty hole, it's a structural core. However, the mainstream skeptics have a different take. They argue that this void is actually a natural sinkhole, or a place where the Earth shifted and collapsed inward over the centuries. But here's the problem with that. Natural collapses are messy. They leave jagged edges and debris. This void is remarkably clean and centered perfectly within the hull's proportions. It's too symmetrical to be an accident of nature. Then there's the moon pool theory. Some naval architects look at this central shaft and wonder if it opened up to the water below. If the ship was floating in a massive storm, a central opening could act as a pressure release for the air trapped underneath, or even a way to manage waste. Imagine the complexity of an engineering project that handles ventilation, lighting, and plumbing 4,000 years ago. When you walk through the digital reconstruction of this chamber, it feels different than the rest of the ship. It feels intentional. It's the kind of detail that turns a floating box into a sophisticated machine. We're looking at a level of technology that shouldn't exist in the Bronze Age. If this atrium really did function as a ventilation and light shaft, it proves that whoever built this wasn't just some guy with a hammer and a dream. They were a master architect who knew exactly how to keep life moving in the middle of a global catastrophe. It's the ultimate zoom-in detail that bridges the gap between a Sunday school story and a real functioning piece of ancient tech, the physics of the boat. This is where the "it's just a myth" argument starts to hit a major wall of math. If you're a freshman engineering student, the first thing you learn about wood is that it has limits. Usually, once a wooden ship gets longer than about 300 feet, it starts to hog or sag. Basically, it flexes with the waves until the hull cracks and the whole thing sinks. This is why the USS Wyoming, the longest wooden ship ever built in the 1900s, was a leaking disaster. So, how could a ship 500 feet long survive a global flood? The answer lies in the 2026 structural scans, which show something weird. The wood isn't just laid out in simple planks. It appears to be laminated or layered in a cross-grain pattern. Think of it like ancient plywood, but on a massive industrial scale. By layering the wood and potentially petrifying it with a heavy coating of bitumen or pitch, which the scans show as a dense, carbon-rich outer shell, the builders created a composite material that was stronger than the sum of its parts. Then there's the aspect ratio. Most modern ships are built for speed, so they're long and thin. This structure, however, has a 6-to-1 ratio. According to a 1993 study by the Korea Research Institute of Ships and Ocean Engineering, this exact ratio is the sweet spot for stability. You could tilt this thing nearly 90 degrees and it wouldn't capsize. It wasn't built to go anywhere. It was built to stay upright while the world ended. It's essentially a giant floating fortress designed to move with the energy of the water rather than fighting against it. The physics of the surge are also wild to consider. When you're at the top of a mountain, you aren't dealing with a calm pool. You're dealing with massive hydraulic pressure and shifting currents. The scans show that the prow of the formation is reinforced with extra thick bracing. It's as if the builders knew they were going to be taking head-on impacts from debris and massive swells. They weren't just guessing, they were over-engineering for a worst-case scenario that actually happened. The weight distribution found in the scans also points to a sophisticated understanding of center of gravity. The lowest deck is packed with what looks like heavy, mineralized ballast, which would have acted like a weighted keel to keep the ship from flipping in high winds. When you run the numbers on the buoyancy and the structural integrity of a 3-decked vessel with these specific dimensions, the math actually checks out. It's a terrifyingly efficient design that shouldn't have been possible for a primitive civilization. We aren't looking at a raft. We're looking at a masterclass in naval physics that would make a modern engineer do a double-take. While the physical structure is mind-blowing, the most haunting evidence isn't the shape of the boat. It's the chemical ghost it left behind in the dirt. The chemical ghost. If you're looking for a giant wooden boat that's been sitting in the mud for thousands of years, you have to manage your expectations. Wood rots. Organic matter breaks down. You aren't going to find shiny, fresh cedar planks after 4 millennia of exposure to the elements. But in 2026, forensic archaeologists aren't looking for wood. They're looking for the memory of wood. This is what experts call a chemical ghost, and the soil samples coming out of the Darupanar site are bleeding evidence that something massive and organic once occupied this space. When the team drilled core samples into the hollow sections identified by the radar, they didn't just find dirt. They found a concentration of organic carbon that is significantly higher than anything in the surrounding mountain. This isn't just mulch. It's petrified decay. The forensics show a high level of marine minerals, specifically things like manganese and phosphorus, which are usually found in high concentrations in ocean environments or decaying biological matter. Why is there a concentrated pocket of deep-sea minerals 6,000 feet above sea level? The bleeding effect is the most fascinating part. As the original timber decayed, it leached carbon and resins into the surrounding clay. Over thousands of years, the mud hardened around the ship like a protective cast. Even if the wood itself has been replaced by minerals through a process called permineralization, the chemical signature remains trapped in the earth. The team found traces of iron oxide and what looks like rivet signatures, small, localized bursts of metal oxidation spaced out at regular intervals along the hull lines. There is also the presence of extant animal fats and hair follicles preserved in the deeper anaerobic layers of the mud where oxygen couldn't reach. This isn't just a rock formation that looks like a boat. It's a site that is chemically saturated with the remnants of life. If you analyze the soil profile, you see a clear horizon where the natural mountain soil ends and the vessel soil begins. The vessel soil is rich, dark, and packed with nitrogen, the kind of profile you'd expect from a massive enclosed space that once housed a significant amount of biological activity. Critics argue that these minerals could have come from ancient volcanic activity, as the region is geologically active. But the way these chemicals are concentrated only within the boat-shaped perimeter is too precise to be a coincidence. It's as if the mountain itself is holding a 500-foot-long fingerprint. When you look at the lab results, you're looking at the forensic breakdown of a catastrophe. We are literally digging through the molecular remains of a 4,000-year-old graveyard, and the dirt is telling a story that the wood can no longer speak. It's the smoking gun of the discovery, the evidence that something lived, breathed, and eventually decayed exactly where the legend said it would. But even if the chemistry is convincing, the locals will tell you that we're just late to the party, because this mountain has been carrying a specific name and a heavy weight of legend for longer than history books can track. The Mountain of the Kurds. When Western researchers first started showing up with satellites and ground-penetrating radar, the local Kurdish villagers in the surrounding hills were mostly just confused about why it took everyone so long to look. To the people who live in the shadow of the mountain, this isn't a discovery. It's a landmark. For generations, the Kurds have referred to this region as Kudi Dağ, or some variation of the place of descent. While the rest of the world was arguing about whether the Ark was on the snowy peaks of Mount Ararat, the locals were pointing to this specific formation and saying, "It's right there." The oral traditions of the local tribes are incredibly specific. They don't just talk about a big boat, they talk about a ship from the stars, or a vessel that rested on the heights. Long before 1959, when a Turkish Air Force pilot spotted the boat shape in an aerial photograph, the shepherds in the area were already telling stories about their ancestors finding bits of black wood or metal studs on the slope after heavy rains. These aren't people looking to make a buck on tourism. These are people whose entire cultural geography is built around the idea that the world started over right here. Satellite imagery from the last few decades has actually started to back up these old wives' tales. When you zoom in on the topography, you can see ancient trails that lead directly from the valley floor up to the site, suggesting it was a place of pilgrimage thousands of years ago. There are ruins of small ancient structures. Some say they were early shrines or churches, dotted around the perimeter of the formation. It's as if the site was treated as a holy zone, long before modern archaeology was even a thing. The local name for the nearby village translates roughly to the Village of Eight, which many believe refers to the 8 survivors of the flood. Even the nearby city of Nakhchivan has a name that means the place of first descent. When you look at the map, every name, every trail, and every local legend points to this one specific coordinate. The skeptics like to call it confirmation bias, arguing that people just named the places after the story. But the sheer consistency of the geography is hard to ignore. The Kurdish elders talk about the mountain as a witness. They describe the formation not as a rock, but as something that doesn't belong to the mountain. They see the mountain as the cradle and the boat shape as the baby. This cultural connection provides a layer of evidence that radar can't capture. It's the human scan of the site. When you combine the satellite data with the stories whispered in Kurdish tea houses for 1,000 years, the anomaly starts to feel less like a geological fluke and more like a permanent resident that the world simply forgot to visit. It turns the search for the Ark from a hunt for a thing into an investigation of a place that has never forgotten its own history. If the mountain itself is the witness, then the massive, bored-out boulders scattered across the landscape are the fingerprints of the builders, and they are found exactly where the current would have dropped them. The Anchorstone Trail. About 15 miles away from the main site, in a village called Arzap, you'll find something that makes zero sense for a mountain range. Giant, upright limestone slabs with perfectly carved holes at the top. These aren't just rocks, they're anchor stones. In ancient Mediterranean shipping, sailors used stones exactly like these to stabilize their ships in heavy seas. But there's a catch. Most ancient anchor stones are about the size of a microwave. The ones found here are up to 10 feet tall and weigh several tons. If you're building a 500-foot ship, you can't use a little iron hook. You need mass. Researchers believe these stones were suspended from the hull by thick ropes made of braided hemp. They acted as sea anchors, or drogues. Instead of pinning the ship to the bottom, which would be impossible in a global flood, they would have hung deep in the water to keep the ship's nose pointed into the waves. This prevented the vessel from turning sideways or broaching, which is the fastest way for a ship to capsize and sink. The 2026 team used drone mapping to plot the location of every stone found so far, and the trail is staggering. They form a linear path leading directly toward the Darupanar Formation. It's as if the ship was dragging these massive weights through the rising or receding waters. And as the water grew shallower or the ropes frayed, the stones were snapped off and left behind in the mud. Geologically, these stones are limestone, which isn't native to the immediate volcanic peak of the mountain. They were brought here from somewhere else. Some of the stones have ancient crosses carved into them, leading skeptics to claim they are just Khachkars, or Armenian memorial stones from the Middle Ages. But the carvings are clearly much newer than the stones themselves. Forensic weathering patterns suggest the holes were worn down by the friction of heavy rope thousands of years before someone carved a cross onto the surface. It's a classic case of a later civilization finding something holy and putting their own stamp on it. When you stand next to one of these stones, you realize the sheer scale of the engineering involved. To move a 10-ton stone, let alone hang it from a ship, requires a level of mechanical leverage that we usually don't attribute to primitive man. They are the brakes of the vessel, the silent guardians that kept the ship from being smashed against the peaks of the Zagros Mountains. This trail of stones acts as a GPS track from the past, leading us straight to the stern of the ship, and proving that this wasn't a passive drift, it was a managed, engineered voyage. Even with the massive anchor stones pointing the way, the actual work of seeing through the mountain is a brutal fight between cutting-edge sensors and the unforgiving Earth. Modern tech versus mud. The biggest enemy on the mountain isn't the cold, it's the overburden. This is the 20 to 30 feet of hardened volcanic clay, rock slides, and sediment that has pressurized the site over millennia. To see through this, the team is deploying synthetic aperture radar, SAR, and infrared thermography via low-flying drones. By measuring how the ground holds heat, they can actually see the thermal fingerprint of the structures underneath. Solid rock cools down slowly, while hollow chambers and porous wood remains buoyant at a different rate. The real MVP of the mission, however, is the AI-enhanced muon tomography. Muons are subatomic particles that rain down from space. They pass through solid objects, but they get slightly deflected by dense material. By placing muon detectors around the base of the formation, the team can create a CT scan of the mountain. In 2026, the AI processing these particle hits has become so fast that it can filter out the noise of the soil and reveal the sharp edges of the interior. This is how the hidden chamber was truly confirmed. The muon counts dropped significantly in a rectangular zone, proving a massive pocket of air or low-density material exists exactly where the central atrium should be. This tech is also solving the petrification riddle. The drones use hyperspectral imaging to map the chemical composition of the surface. This revealed a rib pattern of high iron concentrations that aren't present anywhere else on the ridge. It's as if the scanners are stripping away the mud layer by layer, revealing a ghost ship made of data. But it's a constant struggle. Every time a storm rolls in, the moisture in the soil changes the radar's conductivity, blurring the image. The team also faces the clutter problem. The ground is filled with magnetic minerals and volcanic debris that create false positives. To combat this, the 2026 crew uses Generative Adversarial Networks, GANs, basically a type of AI that pits two models against each other. One model tries to prove the chamber is just a natural cave, while the other tries to prove it's a man-made structure. Only the data that survives both models is used. This high-stakes digital tug-of-war is the only reason we have the clarity we do today. We aren't just finding the Ark. We are reconstructing it, bite by bite, out of a mountain that is trying its best to keep its secrets hidden. It's a battle of 21st century silicon against 4,000-year-old silt. And for the first time, the silicon is winning. As the digital evidence piles up, the tension is reaching a boiling point back in the world of academia, where the discovery is being treated more like a crime scene than a miracle. The Controversy Lab. Whenever you have a find this big, you're going to have an equally big target on your back. In the Controversy Lab, which is basically what we call the global peer review dogfight, the 2026 team is facing a wall of skepticism. Mainstream archaeology is notoriously hesitant to touch anything related to the Ark because it's career-ending. If you say you found it, you're often lumped in with the fringe theorists and the Indiana Jones wannabes. The academic establishment has a different explanation for everything we've seen. They call the whole site a syncline. A syncline is a natural geological fold where the ground basically pinches together into a boat-like shape. Skeptics argue that the walls of the ship are just tilted layers of limestone, and the hollow chambers are nothing more than natural gas pockets or pockets of soluble rock that dissolved over time. They look at the ribs and see natural erosion. They look at the voids and see empty volcanic bubbles. To them, the human brain is just doing what it does best, pareidolia, or seeing familiar patterns in random noise. It's the same reason people see faces on Mars or Jesus on a piece of toast. But the 2026 team is pushing back with the impossible symmetry argument. Natural gas pockets don't usually form in perfect 90-degree angles, and they certainly don't align themselves into three distinct level decks. The team's lead geologist recently pointed out that the probability of a natural syncline producing a 500-foot-long, perfectly proportional, multi-layered structure with a central ventilation shaft is effectively zero. It's like finding a functioning watch in a desert and claiming the wind just blew the gears together. There's also a massive political and religious tug-of-war happening behind the scenes. Some governments are hesitant to allow a full-scale excavation because of the sheer chaos it would cause. If this is proven to be the Ark, it's not just a win for archaeology, it's a global paradigm shift. It would mean that a massive, cataclysmic event actually happened, and that ancient humans were far more technologically advanced than we give them credit for. The Controversy Lab isn't just about rocks and radar, it's about who gets to write the history of the world. For every scientist cheering for the data, there's another hoping the next scan shows nothing but mud, because the alternative is just too big for the textbooks to handle. The debate might be heating up in the labs, but if we step away from the if and look at the how, the logistics of the ship itself reveal a level of planning that feels less like a miracle and more like a massive floating operation. The logistics of the voyage. Let's get real for a second. If this thing is actually a 500-foot floating zoo, the logistics are a nightmare. You don't just put animals in a box and hope for the best. The 2026 scans have allowed researchers to speculate on how the room functions might have actually worked. We're seeing evidence of what look like sloped floors in certain sections of the lower decks. In modern farming, sloped floors are used for waste management. Basically, gravity does the cleaning for you. The second deck shows a high density of smaller modular partitions. If you're housing everything from insects to apex predators, you need specialized climate control and containment. The central atrium we talked about earlier would have been the engine room for all of this. It would have pulled the ammonia and methane out of the lower decks while circulating fresh, oxygen-rich air from the top. It's not just a boat. It's a self-sustaining biosphere. Then there's the food. The scans show massive, dense storage zones near the stern. These aren't empty voids. They are packed with mineralized remains that look like ancient grain stores and dried fodder. To keep a crew of 8 and thousands of animals alive for a year, you need a supply chain that starts before the first drop of rain even falls. The logistics suggest that the voyage wasn't a desperate scramble. It was a meticulously planned relocation project. When you look at the 3D model, you see ramps instead of stairs. This is a huge detail. Moving heavy animals up and down 3 decks requires a specific grade of incline. The scans show these ramps connecting the levels at precise angles, allowing for the flow of movement through the ship's core. It's the kind of detail that makes you realize this wasn't just a container. It was a living, breathing habitat designed to endure the impossible. Every room discovered in the 2026 scan adds another layer to the story of how a small group of people managed the most complex logistical challenge in human history. It turns the myth into a manual. At the end of the day, whether you're a skeptic or a believer, you're left with a choice. Do you trust the chaos of nature or the precision of the data? Leave your comments below and hit subscribe to stay tuned for the next uploads.